Hi, my name's Vince Sheehan, and today I'd like to talk about the Beatles Get Back, the recent documentary directed by Peter Jackson in 3 episodes, available to stream on the Disney Channel. I watched this recently, and as a lifelong Beatles fan, I just felt I needed to do a short video sharing my thoughts on this. Now, this documentary in 3 parts, it's very long, I think it's nearly 8 hours long all told. It's all about the making of the classic Beatles album Let It Be, the penultimate album to be recorded by the Beatles but the last one to be released. And the genesis and the recording of this album is well known, of course, because at the time Let It Be came out, a film was released directed by Michael Lindsay Hogg about the making of the album, and Peter Jackson's documentary is kind of an expanded version of that. Now, the original film, which was called Let It Be, like the album, received, very mixed reviews, it's fair to say. That the Beatles are very much painted in a rather negative light, bickering and kind of not getting on with each other, etc. But this new documentary, which Peter Jackson has put together, having access by Apple to hours upon hours of footage and audio recordings, this documentary paints the Beatles in a different light. So let's go through the 3 episodes briefly. At the beginning of episode 1, we have this helpful reminder of who the Beatles were and their rise to superstardom from their early days in Liverpool and Hamburg to the release of their first album, Please Please Me, through to the chaos of Beatlemania and the excitement of them breaking America, through to their more experimental albums, their use of drugs, John Lennon's controversial remarks about their popularity when compared to Jesus Christ, the massive watershed moment that was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and all the way up to their retreat in Rishikesh in India and the recording of the White Album. So we're kind of given a potted history of the Beatles up until the beginning of the rehearsals for Let It Be. And the Beatles have got about a month to put together an album. Ringo Starr is contracted to star in a film, The Magic Christian, which is due to begin filming, I think, in February of 1969. So at the very beginning of January 1969, the Beatles get together and they want to do something a little bit different. They want to kind of go back to basics a bit more, with the band playing together as a band once again, rather than using the studio extensively. And they've kind of got this idea that they want to perform this album live in this big concert. And added to that, they have decided to document the process through a film directed by Michael Lindsay Hogg, who is a never-present character in this documentary. So they're getting back together the freezing month of January 1969, and they're meeting at Twickenham Film Studios to rehearse new material. They're in this cavernous studio. The band turn up, I think John Lennon's very late, and eventually they turn up and they start throwing around a few ideas, rehearsing a few songs which they've worked on. And already you get the feeling that Paul McCartney is really pulling the strings here. He's the main creative force. He seems the most focused anyway, particularly at the beginning of the recording session. Now, you do get a sense that the band are 4 distinct people with their own egos, and there are these rough edges between them. And Paul McCartney in particular seems to wind some of the other Beatles up, particularly George Harrison. And Paul wants a certain passage to be played in a particular way, and George kind of takes exception to this, and somewhat shockingly he leaves the Beatles. He's had enough, he just goes. And that's how this first episode, days 1 to 7, ends. the Beatles are in disarray. The next episode, days 8 to 16, initially shows the Beatles to be in the doldrums as such. George has left. John and Paul have this meeting over lunch to try and sort the situation out, what they're going to do. They all have a meeting at George's place, which goes disastrously wrong. But then eventually George returns and everything's cool again. And they are not happy at Twickenham Film Studios, so they decide to relocate to their studio in Savile Row in central London. And they seem to be far happier there. Added to that, they bump into Billy Preston, the keyboardist, who they knew from their Hamburg days, and they ask him to join them for this album. And he seems to be a very calm character, and he seems to really improve the mood generally. The Beatles perhaps being on their best behaviour to impress him, but also they just seem to gel a lot more when Billy Preston is around. And they're working well together. Now they're still thinking about how they're going to have this live performance at the end of this album, what they're going to do. There's various options floating around. One of them, I think, includes this vast amphitheatre in North Africa somewhere. But at the end of this episode, they get the idea of maybe doing a concert on the roof of Apple HQ, their studios on Savile Row. The final episode, which covers days 17 to 22, really consists of the Beatles rehearsing the material solidly. John Lennon also talks about a meeting he's had with Alan Klein, who wants to be the Beatles manager, and John seems to be kind of very impressed with him, and the others meet with him a bit later on, but he's somewhat of a controversial character, and things concerning Alan Klein come to a head after the recording of this album. And finally they have this Rooftop Performance, which proved to be the Beatles' last public performance together. On a freezing cold day they perform on top of this roof, and passers-by down below and locals suddenly think, what's this noise? And they realise what's going on, so people start milling around in the streets watching this performance of new Beatles material. And then some people start to complain about the noise, and the Metropolitan Police turn up. The Beatles employees delay the police a bit, as much as they can, before they finally have to stop. The whole documentary finishes with the last day of recording for the album Let It Be. Now, what did I make of this? I thought this was absolutely fascinating. I thought it was so revelatory in many ways, really, but perhaps most of all in how the Beatles work together creatively. Such a privilege to see the four of them just sitting around working on ideas, and seeing them kind of chip in with other songs. They very much seem to want to help each other out in their songs and offer ideas. I think there's one example that sticks in my head is when George Harrison was playing his All Things Must Pass song, which appears on his on the solo album later on. And John Lennon suggests changing a line, and it is a much better line. It's also fascinating to see the Beatles kind of clowning around a lot. There seems to be a lot of fun. The original film, the Let It Be film, is notorious for showing the Beatles arguing and fighting. And there is that in this, of course there is, particularly with George Harrison leaving. But there's so much laughter and messing around and doing funny faces, singing the songs in funny voices. Yeah, I mean, it's a real joy to see that. Another revelation really was how involved Glyn Johns was in the whole process. You always think of George Martin, don't you, with the Beatles, and of course his influence was incalculable. But Glyn Johns, I suppose he's the engineer. I mean, he really kept things going in many ways, and he seemed to be kind of ultra professional and keeping them on schedule, and very much involved with offering his own take on things concerning the songs as well. He comes across as a very kind of central figure in this recording process. And just seeing Paul McCartney as well. Yes, he had this reputation of being a bit domineering over the other Beatles and perhaps been a bit condescending, you know, and but he's just so involved with the process, and he's got such high standards. He just wants things to be the best they can be, and you know, and all fair play to him, because he really is the one who keeps it all together and, you know, ensures that there's a finished product. And of course his songwriting is just such a high calibre. I think above all though, what impressed me about this was seeing these familiar songs, perhaps overly familiar songs, but great songs, being pieced together and kind of coalescing in front of your eyes. You know, like hearing the first time they go through, Paul introduces Get Back, and he hasn't got the lyrics, and we know the lyrics, but he doesn't know them yet. And it's just such a weird but fascinating experience just to look at Paul McCartney or whoever, or John Lennon, whoever it is, and just think, I know this song goes, and they haven't got it yet. And that's just such a thrilling moment, and you know what the words are going to be, but they haven't quite figured it out yet, or some of the chord changes, etc. And that is just such a privilege to see that, to see these songs being brought together in front of your eyes, even when you've heard the finished product millions of times. I have to be honest, in the last episode I think they played Get Back continually 4 or 5 times, and I was thinking, I've had enough of this song now. But nevertheless, you know, the whole thing is just amazing. The rooftop concert itself is fairly chaotic. They run through a few of the songs a couple of times, but of course a few of the performances were used in the final album, and you can really see the band really kind of hitting their groove, and you can really see John Lennon in particular really getting into the swing of things. You know, he kind of has that kind of in-your-face posture, the way he plays the guitar and sings, and you can really see that they were so tight and close together musically here. And although it's a shame the police cut the performance short, it's quite funny to see like these typical British plods come into Apple HQ and kind of make their way to the roof eventually. And it's funny to see the delaying tactics of the staff, and even when they are on the roof, the Beatles don't stop, you know. They turn their amps on again and off they go, and so I love the attitude there. It's pretty awesome. It's how you want the Beatles to react. So yeah, Get Back, the Beatles, an amazing documentary, such an insight into how the greatest band ever composed and rehearsed and worked together. A great insight into how the technical side of things as well, in terms of the studio and the engineering of the album. And yeah, this has to be, you know, one of the, for my money, one of the greatest music documentaries ever made. I mean, it really is incredible, and perhaps something which is more balanced than the original Let It Be film, and something I think far more valuable as a document of a particular time in British life, but also the genius of an exceptional rock band. Thanks for watching. There's just a brief slideshow following this. Bye.